Chapter 14 of Indian Child Life. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Indian Child Life by Charles Eastman. The Grave of the Dog. The full moon was just clear of the high mountain ranges when the game scout moved slowly homeward, well wrapped in his long buffalo robe, which was securely belted to his strong loins, his quiver tightly tied to his shoulders so as not to impede his progress. As he emerged from the lowlands into the upper regions, he loomed up a gigantic figure against the clear moonlit horizon. His picturesque fox-skin cap, with all its trimmings, was encrusted with frost from the breath of his nostrils, and his lagging footfall sounded crisply. The distance he had that day covered was enough for any human endurance, yet he was neither faint nor hungry, but his feet were frozen into the snowshoes, so that he could not run any faster than an easy slip and slide. At last he reached the much coveted point, the crown of the last ascent, and when he smelled fire and the savory odor of the jerked buffalo meat, it well nigh caused him to waver. But he must not fail to follow the custom of untold ages and give the game scout's wolf call before entering camp. Accordingly, he paused upon the highest point of the ridge and uttered a cry to which the hungry cry of a real wolf would have seemed but a coyote's yelp in comparison. Then it was that the rest of the buffalo hunters knew that their game scout was returning with welcome news, for the unsuccessful scout enters the camp silently. In the meantime, the hunters at the temporary camp were aroused to a high pitch of excitement. Some turned their buffalo robes and put them on in such a way as to convert themselves into make-believe bison and begin to tread the snow, while others were singing the buffalo song, that their spirits might be charmed and allured within the circle of the campfires. The scout, too, was singing his buffalo bull song in a guttural, lowing chant as he neared the hunting camp. Within arrow shot, he paused again, while the usual ceremonies were enacted for his reception. This done, he was seated with the leaders in a chosen place. It was a long run, he said, but there were no difficulties. I found the first herd directly north of here. The second herd, a great one, is northeast near Shell Lake. The snow is deep. The buffalo can only follow their leader in their retreat. Hi, hi, hi! The hunters exclaimed solemnly in token of gratitude, raising their hands heavenward and then pointing them toward the ground. Ho-kola! One more round of the buffalo pipe. Then we shall retire to rise before daybreak for the hunt, advised one of the leaders. Silently they partook in turn of the long-stemmed pipe, and one by one, with a delightful ho, departed to their teepees. The scout betook himself to his little old buffalo teepee, which he used for winter hunting expeditions. His faithful Shunka, who had been all this time its only occupant, met him at the entrance, as dogs alone know how to welcome a lifelong friend. As his master entered, he stretched himself in his old-time way from the tip of his tail to that of his tongue, and finished by curling both ends upward. Ho, Mita Shunka! Eat this, for you must be hungry. So saying, the scout laid before his canine friend the last piece of his dried buffalo meat. It was the sweetest meal ever eaten by a dog, judging by his long smacking of his lips after he had swallowed it. The hunting party was soon lost in heavy slumber. Not a sound could be heard save the gnawing of the ponies upon the cottonwood bark, which was provided for them instead of hay in the winter time. When Wapashaw, the game scout, had rolled himself in his warm buffalo robe and was sound asleep, his faithful companion hunter, the great Esquimaux wolf dog, silently rose and again stretched himself, then stood quiet for a moment as if meditating. It was clear that he knew well what he had planned to do, but was considering how he should do it without arousing any suspicion of his movement. This is a dog's art, and the night tricks and marooting must always be the joy and secret of his life. Softly he emerged from the lodge and gave a sweeping glance around to assure him that there were none to spy upon him. Suspiciously he sniffed the air, as if to ascertain whether there could be any danger to his sleeping master while he should be away. Up the long ascent he trotted in a northerly direction, yet not following his master's trail. He was large and formidable in strength, combining the features of his wild brothers of the plains with those of the dogs who keep company with the red men. His jet black hair and sharp ears and nose appeared to immense advantage against the spotless and jeweled snow, until presently his own warm breath had coated him with heavy frost. After a time Shunka struck into his master's trail and followed it all the way, only taking a short cut here and there, when by dog instinct he knew that a man must go around such a point to get to his destination. He met many travelers during the night, but none had dared to approach him, though some few followed at a distance, as if to discover his purpose. At last he reached Shell Lake, and there beheld a great gathering of the herds. They stood in groups, like enormous rocks, no longer black, but white with frost. Every one of them emitted a white steam, quickly frozen into a fine snow in the air. Shunka sat upon his haunches and gazed. "Woof! This is it," he said to himself. He had kept still when the game scout gave the wolf call, though the camp was in an uproar, and from the adjacent hills the wild hunters were equally joyous, because they understood the meaning of the unwonted noise. Yet his curiosity was not fully satisfied, and he had set out to discover the truth, and it may be to protect or serve his master in case of danger. At daybreak the dog meekly entered his master's rude teepee and found him already preparing for the prospective hunt. He was filling his inside moccasins full of buffalo hair to serve as stockings, over which he put on his large buffalo moccasins with the hair inside, and adjusted his warm leggins. He then adjusted his snowshoes and filled his quiver full of good arrows. The dog quietly lay down in a warm place, making himself as small as possible, as if to escape observation, and calmly watched his master. Soon all the hunters were running in single file upon the trail of the scout, each Indian closely followed by his trusty hunting dog. In less than 2 hours they stood just back of the low ridge which rounded the south side of Shell Lake. The narrow strip of land between its twin divisions was literally filled with the bison. In the gulches beyond, between the dark lines of timber, there were also scattered groups, but the hunters at once saw their advantage over the herd upon the peninsula. "Heketukola! This is well, friends," exclaimed the first to speak. "These can be forced to cross the slippery ice and the mire around the springs. This will help us get more meat. Our people are hungry, and we must kill many in order to feed them." "Oh, he is always right. Our dogs must help us here. The meat will be theirs as well as ours," another added. "Toshikola, the game scout's dog, is the greatest Shunka of them all. He has a mind near like that of a man. Let him lead the attack of his fellows, while we crawl up on the opposite side and surround the buffalo upon the slippery ice." And in the deceitful mire spoke up a third. So it was agreed that the game scout and his Shunka should lead the attack. "Woo, woo, woo!" was the hoarse signal from the throat of the game scout, but his voice was drowned by the howling and barking of the savage dogs as they made their charge. In a moment all was confusion among the buffalo. Some started this way, others that, and the great mass swayed to and fro uncertainly. A few were ready to fight, but the snow was too deep for a countercharge upon the dogs, save on the ice just in front of them, where the wind had always full sweep. There all was slippery and shining. In their excitement and confusion, the bison rushed upon this uncertain plain. The weight and the momentum of their rush carried them hopelessly far out, where they were again confused as to which way to go, and many were stuck in the mire which was concealed by the snow, except here and there an opening above a spring from which there issued a steaming vapor. The game scout and his valiant dog led on the force of canines with deafening war cries, and one could see black heads here and there popping from behind the embankments. As the herd finally swept toward the opposite shore, many dead were left behind. Pierced by the arrows of the hunters, they lay like black mounds upon the grassy plain. It was a great hunt. Once more the camp will be well fed, they thought, and this good fortune will help us to reach the spring alive. A chant of rejoicing rang out from the opposite shore, while the game scout unsheathed his big knife and began the work which is ever the sequel of the hunt, to dress the game, although the survivors of the slaughter had scarcely disappeared behind the hills. All were busily skinning and cutting the meat into pieces convenient for carrying, when suddenly a hunter called the attention of those near him to an ominous change in the atmosphere. "There are signs of a blizzard. We must hurry into the near woods before it reaches us," he shouted. Some heard him, others did not. Those who saw or heard passed on the signal and hurried toward the wood, where others had already arranged rude shelters and gathered piles of dry wood for fuel. Around the several camp fires the hunters sat or stood while slices of savory meat were broiled and eaten with a relish by the half-starved men. But the storm had now fairly enveloped them in whirling whiteness. "Woo! Woo!" they called to those who had not yet reached camp. One after another answered and emerged from the blinding pall of snow. At last none were missing save the game scout and his Shunka. The hunters passed the time in eating and telling stories until a late hour, occasionally giving a united shout to guide the lost one, should he chance to pass near the camp. "Fear not for our scout, friends," finally exclaimed a leader among them. "He is a brave and experienced man. He will find a safe resting place and join us when the wind ceases to rage." So they all wrapped themselves in their robes and lay down to sleep. All that night and the following day it was impossible to give succor, and the hunters felt much concern for the absent. Late in the second night the great storm subsided. "Ho, ho, Iyotanka, rise up!" So the first hunter to awaken aroused all the others. As after every other storm, it was wonderfully still, so still that no one could hear distinctly the pounding feet of the jackrabbits coming down over the slopes to the willows for food. All dry vegetation was buried beneath the deep snow, and everywhere they saw this white-robed creature of the prairie coming down to the wood. Now the air was full of the wolf and coyote game call, and they were seen in great numbers upon the ice. "See! See! The hungry wolves are dragging the carcasses away. Hearken to the war cries of the scout's Shunka. Hurry! Hurry!" they urged one another in chorus. Away they ran and out upon the lake, now upon the wind-swept ice, now upon the crusted snow, running when they could, sliding when they must. There was certainly a great concourse of the wolves, whirling in frantic circles, but continually moving toward the farther end of the lake. They could certainly distinctly hear the hoarse bark of the scout's Shunka, and occasionally the muffled war whoop of a man, as if it came from under the ice. As they approached nearer the scene they could hear more distinctly the voice of their friend, but still as it were from underground. When they reached the spot to which the wolves had dragged two of the carcasses of the buffalo, Shunka was seen to stand by one of them, but at that moment he staggered and fell. The hunters took out their knives and ripped up the frozen hide covering the abdominal cavity. It revealed a warm nest of hay and buffalo hair, in which the scout lay, wrapped in his own robe. He had placed his dog in one of the carcasses and himself in another for protection from the storm, but the dog was wiser than the man, for he kept his entrance open. The man lapped the hide over, and it froze solidly, shutting him securely in. When the hungry wolves came, Shunka promptly extricated himself and held them off as long as he could. Meanwhile, sliding and pulling, the wolves continued to drag over the slippery ice the body of the buffalo in which his master had taken refuge. The poor faithful dog, with no care for his own safety, stood by his imprisoned master until the hunters came up. But it was too late, for he had received more than one mortal wound. As soon as the scout got out, with a face more anxious for another than for himself, he exclaimed, "Where is Shunka, the bravest of his tribe?" "Ho, kola, it is so, indeed, and here he lies," replied one sadly. His master knelt by his side, gently stroking the face of the dog. "Ah, my friend, you go where all spirits live. The Great Mystery has a home for every living creature. May he permit our meeting there." At daybreak the scout carried him up to one of the pretty round hills overlooking the lake, and built up around him walls of loose stone. Red paints were scattered over the snow, in accordance with Indian custom, and the farewell song was sung. Since that day the place has been known to the Sioux as Shunkahanakapi, the Grave of the Dog. End of The Grave of the Dog. End of The Indian Child Life by Charles Eastman.